Hello, my name is Ian Beabout, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we will be taking a look at the reissue of Storm Corrosion, the 2012 collaboration between Opeth's Mikael Akerfelt and Porcupine Tree's Steven Wilson. This is a really interesting release, and it came at a time of transition for both artists. So in 2011, Opeth released Heritage, which is this great folksy hard rock metal album that was one of the first albums in a series of records in which Opeth dropped the death metal aesthetic, the death metal growls, and featured Mikael Akerfelt singing in a more traditional sense. And I believe that this record kind of picks up that vibe really nicely. And at the same time, you also had Steven Wilson really embracing a solo career. Grace for Drowning, I remember, came out at about the same time as Heritage, but it was a similar kind of departure because up until that point, Porcupine Tree had been following this career toward progressive metal. They had released The Incident, which wasn't super well received from what I remember. And I don't think the band were that happy with it. I think they felt like they were recycling a lot of ideas on that album. And so Grace for Drowning saw Wilson embrace jazz, electronic, some more folky textures. I really feel like this album, Storm Corrosion, came at a really, like a perfect time for both of them, where they were looking for things that were different, looking to try new things. I believe at one point they were even considering releasing it as an April Fool's joke, taking their names off of it and just putting it out there and see who found it. Sort of like XTC and the Dukes of Stratosphere. If you're familiar with those records, which are similar, kind of a departure from the normal sound. This originally came out in 2012, and I did own it back then. And it was originally issued with a 5.1 surround mix, which is included. I didn't own this album anymore. I had sold it off when I started my business. So I was actually really glad when the reissue was announced, because I've noticed that a lot of these records going back a decade or more are now out of print and can be very expensive secondhand. So in my opinion, this is a welcome release. So what I'm going to tell you is, if you already own this album, is it worth picking up? That's kind of the conclusion that I hope to reach by the end of the video. So this album is 6 tracks. It's just under an hour long. Musically, this draws on a lot of shared influences between Steven Wilson and Mikael Akerfelt. I hear echoes of Scott Walker's The Drift. I hear echoes of Comus's First Utterance. I also hear elements of the German scene, Tangerine Dream. I hear Popova and soundtrack music. I also hear a little bit of Talk Talk and the Mark Hollis influence, as well as moments that are purely the work of these gentlemen. Like, I can really tell at times who wrote what, or at least I think I can tell. I think I can make a pretty good educated guess. And I suppose when we go track by track, I'll talk a little bit more about that. As for extras, we have a newly created 2024 mini documentary. We have the original Drag Ropes promotional video. And as for audio options, we have the album in high-resolution stereo, which I believe would be the original mix. We have the new 2024 Atmos mix. We have the 5.1 mix, which is the original from 2012. And we have the entire album in instrumental form, which is presented in stereo. Finally, we have 3 additional tracks. We have Drag Ropes live at the Royal Albert Hall. This would have been recorded during the Steven Wilson Royal Albert Hall series of shows, which was released on Blu Ray without this song included, which is a shame. I think it should have been included, because that would have been something really special. Happy to have it here, albeit in audio form only, and in stereo, which I'll get to my thoughts on that in a little bit. Finally, we have demo versions of Drag Ropes and Hag. First, I'm going to just sort of talk about the album in general, and I'll talk about the extras, and then I'll do a final review of the Dolby Atmos mix. Before we get there, don't forget that if you are enjoying this, please do subscribe to the channel. That's the only way to keep up with upcoming releases that I may be reviewing. For instance, I do plan to review the new Opeth album when it comes out late November, so you might want to stick around for that. All right, back to the show. We open up with Drag Ropes, which Steven Wilson and Mikael Akerfelt say that they wrote together over just a couple of glasses of wine. And what an incredible collaboration to start with, because there's something about this track that just sets that mood right away. This is like the perfect autumn record. There's this feeling of folk horror that runs through it. I even get like slightly Kafka vibes. The opening few lyrics sort of put me in the space of Orson Welles' The Trial film, which is based on the famous Kafka story of the same name. But I love how you can hear the bows on the strings, even from the first few moments of the record. It's so clear. It's so well captured. And I believe these strings would have been conducted by Dave Stewart. And that's not Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics. That would be Dave Stewart of National Health, Hatfield in the North, and some of the amazing Canterbury Scene bands that I listened to years ago. So it's really nice to see his name on this package. And I believe he's also on the new Opeth album too. Yeah, Drag Ropes is a 10-minute track. About halfway through, we hear the sound kind of explode into this round of vocals. You hear Steven and Mikael singing together in harmony, which I really love. I think their voices meld together really well. One constant for all the tracks on this album is that it's very sparse. The arrangements seem to be there to just lift up the compositions a little bit, but it's never overbearing. It's never too much. And I think that that's something that does definitely work toward the benefit of this album. So up next we have Storm Corrosion, another 10-minute song. By the way, neither one of these 10-minute songs, and that includes also the last one, none of these feel like 10-minute songs to me. They're all over so quickly and just create this wonderful aural journey that takes you through this land of horror and imagination and beauty. Storm Corrosion, to me, this is a song that I feel was probably written by Mikael Akerfelt for the most part. My evidence for this being that, to my ear, it kind of resembles a song from the Comus record entitled The Herald, which has a similar kind of bewitching, slow, kind of draw you in feel to it. And it's also kind of got a middle section from out of nowhere that doesn't seem to connect with the rest of the song. In this case, the middle section to me feels like something right off of Scott Walker's The Drift. There's also like a Legiti quality to it, kind of like the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. Or even, I was thinking even of a band like Sleepytime Gorilla Museum and some of their more ambient textures. There's some real tension in this middle section that I'm talking about, where it just sounds like strings playing this aleatoric something, and there's just a little bit of like electric guitar on top of it, just adding to the sense of tension. And then when we come back to the rest of the song, it's just more beautiful, haunting melodies and some great piano playing from Steven Wilson. I really think that Steven's piano and keyboard tones are awesome on this album throughout. And I wonder how he captured those, if those are samples, if they're real instruments. Up next, we have the song Hag, which is one of my favorite songs on the album. I think this is a Steven Wilson composition, and if you listen to the demo version, I think that more or less proves it. This song almost makes me think more of The Raven That Refused to Sing. Like I feel like this song could fit on that album more than it would have fit on Grace for Drowning. And there's a moment where things get really dark and heavy, and it makes me think of The Watchmaker, how that song has lighter sections and then it has more abrasive sections. And then there's also a quality to it that reminds me of the pin drop from The Raven That Refused to Sing. You also have Gavin Harrison, drummer from Porcupine Tree and King Crimson, guesting here, playing some amazing parts. When the drums come in, because there's not a lot of percussion on this album. Most of the percussion is kind of twinkly, like glockenspiel and small little chimes and pretty stuff, but it's really nice to have this aggressive moment where Gavin Harrison gets to really smash and thrash. The next song, Happy, is, in typical Steven Wilson Opeth fashion. The song called Happy is maybe one of the darkest things on the album. It starts off with some beautiful electric piano sounds, but the whole song just has this feeling of waiting, of maybe anxiety, a little bit, expectation. It's not one of my favorite albums. It's not one of my favorite songs on the album. It's not that there's a problem with it. I just don't find it particularly memorable. But it's not skippable. I wouldn't skip this song. I think that it's a fine song, and it fits within the progression of the album, and it fits with the contrast and relief, and it leads into my favorite song on the album, which is Loch Howe. And this is another song that I think is 50-50 Akerfelt and Wilson, much like Drag Ropes. I think this is one of the rare times when Steven and Mikael are playing guitar together. I can kind of hear Wilson's signature acoustic sound, playing the dugga-dug, 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 kind of the metal riffs, but I can hear Mikael's nylon string guitar layered with it. And it sounds to me like the same nylon string guitar that's on Heritage on some of those tracks. And I really like the way that this is basically an acoustic number, but it sounds really heavy. There's also this quality to it that makes me think of King Crimson's A Sailor's Tale, because it's got this kind of rising tension throughout. It's very cinematic and expansive. There's this moment where the mellotron comes in, and there's like this Middle Eastern theme to it that I swear was written by Mikael. It just sounds like something off of Ghost Reveries to me. Now, it was probably performed by Wilson, because I think Wilson is mostly the keyboard player, but it seems like something Mikael would write. And that moment with the hand claps is my favorite part of the album. It just rules. There's no other way to put it. And if you don't believe me, go listen to it for yourself. I think this is an absolutely remarkable track. It's Wicker Man mode, if you've ever seen that film, that's kind of where this album sits. Finally, we end with a song with a Swedish title, Judet Inan, The Sound Before. That's what that means. Your guess is as good as mine. This opens with some lovely falsetto singing from Mikael Akerfelt that is so far removed from the death metal growl, it couldn't be less characteristic of him. This really feels like him trying something new. And it's beautiful. Like his falsetto has plenty of tone, and it makes me wonder what Mikael would sound like if he sang on Wilson's Permeating track, which is a infamously divisive Steven Wilson song in which he kind of channels ABBA. ABBA are a Swedish group, and I think that Akerfelt does have some sympathy for them as well. I think he could have been wonderful on a song like that, unexpectedly wonderful. But after the opening section, it kind of transitions into this, again, very cinematic section that puts me in the mind of Papa Vu, the Florian Frick led German Kosmisch krautrock group who scored a lot of Werner Herzog's films. In fact, if I close my eyes, I could kind of see the opening of Aguirre, The Wrath of God, playing out in my head. I know these dudes are huge cinema nerds, so it wouldn't surprise me if they did that on purpose, or were at least thinking of that, of evoking that specific band. But it's very nice. Then it kind of morphs into this section that sounds like it wouldn't have been out of place on a latter-day Talk Talk record. And you hear Gavin Harrison come back playing some wonderfully restrained jazzy drum parts that just kind of sit there and groove. And you can hear Mikael play some lovely electric guitar. There's not a whole lot of electric guitar in this album, but when it's there, it gives me kind of like ending credits vibes off of the Damnation record. And it's really beautiful. It really elevates this album. So this last song is perhaps the most beautiful thing on the album. It's also perhaps the most pastiche. So I don't know if it's my favorite song on the album, but it is taken on its own merits. It is beautiful. I just kind of detract a couple of points simply because it does evoke other older projects to me. And I still think that had they done what they originally intended and released this as sort of a Dukes of Stratosphere kind of situation, that might have worked really well, because you do get the sense that they are paying tribute to their influences perhaps a little bit more than they normally would. But at the same time, it's also a weird album, and it's not like anything that they had really done before. I always felt that of the two of them, Mikael Akerfelt is perhaps the better musician. He's the better songwriter. And the reason for this is that you can tell Mikael's influences, but he always filters it through that very distinctive personality. And I'm not an expert when it comes to like music theory or anything like that, but there's something about his chord choices that I find utterly unique. Steven Wilson's talent, of course, is in production, in capturing a sound. And that is something that I relate to in a huge way as well, being a music producer myself. I think he's one of the best producers working today. But I often find that his songwriting is a little hit or miss for me. He often, to my ears, relies on some of the same chords and chord progressions. And I don't always find his music as nourishing as Opeth's is, Mikael Akerfelt's is. However, he has a wonderful voice. So for me, one of the highlights of this album is that you combine the best of both. You have Wilson's exemplary, faultless production. This is like modern day Alan Parsons to me. So you have that combined with Mikael's highly unique and original approach to harmony and melodic writing. And those things together, I think, make this one of the best albums in either of their catalogs. I really believe that. There may be some Opeth material that I like better, but this is my favorite album in which Steven Wilson is a performer. I guess you can respond to that in the comments and tell me how you feel about that, but that's my opinion. And that comes from somebody who's followed Wilson for a number of years. I've seen him a couple of times. I love his albums. I just relate to Opeth's music more. And that's a reason why I love this album, is that, again, it's the meeting of the minds. It's their strengths coming together. Now that I've talked about the album and kind of how I feel about both of these artists, let's talk a little bit about the extras. So the 2024 mini documentary, I enjoyed that. There's a moment in there that kind of sums up this project nicely, in which Steven Wilson says that there's nothing new under the sun. Nobody has any new ideas. Everybody's tried everything. So the best thing to do is to embrace your influences and try to poke enough of your personality into it. And I feel that does sum up kind of what I said about this project nicely. The only criticism I have against it is that all of the footage was from over 10 years ago when this album was originally recorded. And I think it would have been nice to have filmed some contemporary interviews with Mikael and Steven Wilson, kind of reflecting on this album from, 10 years forward. I think that would have been really nice. And the fact that it says it's a 2024 documentary is misleading in that regard. I think that it would have been better to call it a 2024 archival documentary or something like that. And it's just a real shame that they couldn't even grab one of those guys to kind of reflect back on it and how they feel about it in regards to their work. The Drag Ropes video, I think, is great to have. It's not my favorite thing. It did introduce me and many others to this project, so it's nice to have it for historical purposes, but there's nothing really that I'm excited about when it comes to that. I'm just glad to have it. And we also have Drag Ropes live at the Royal Albert Hall from Steven Wilson's concert there. My beef with this is twofold. Number one, I wish that they would have included video of it, because there is video of it shown in the mini documentary. So why not include video since we're on a Blu-ray? I honestly think Drag Ropes should have been on the Royal Albert Hall Blu-ray that came out several years ago, even as an extra. It should have been included somewhere. Also, I wish that it had been mixed in Atmos. It is presented in stereo. It sounds fantastic. It's a wonderful performance, by the way. It's a great performance. I'm glad to have it. In some ways, it's better than maybe the album version. It's got a little bit more energy to it. I just wish that the video had been included as well as a multi-channel mix. Even 5.1 would have been fine, especially since you're selling this as an Atmos upgrade. Finally, the demo versions of Drag Ropes and Hag I thought were very interesting. Drag Ropes is pretty much the same as what you hear on the final album. In fact, you can tell that they reused a lot of the same stems in the final version, so it's a fascinating peek into the way that this album was created. However, the demo version for Hag is about 2 minutes longer than the finalized version, and it's very different. There's some extra sections. There's some drums that bleed over into parts that the drums weren't in originally. So I really like including this. The final thing to talk about is the Dolby Atmos mix. And I also want to come to some sort of conclusion. Is this worth buying if you already own the 2012 version, which I don't? Or is this only of interest to you if you don't already own it? Well, the first answer to that question is to talk about the Atmos mix. So I compared a little bit the Atmos mix to the 5.1, and the 5.1 again is from 2012, so it's over a decade old now. And my impression is that this is one of the finest Atmos mixes that I've heard to date, and a direct comparison to the 5.1 reveals that the 5.1 was quite good to start with. I really don't have any issues with the 5.1. I don't think it's a poor mix. I think it's a great mix. However, what I hear is that a lot of the individual instrument compression has been removed from the Dolby Atmos mix. Also, Wilson has gotten creative with placement. He's gotten creative with panning. Moments like in Lockow, where everything goes quiet and you hear just that glockenspiel or whatever that bell sound is, whatever that twinkly sound is, that actually rotates around the room, and I don't hear that in the original 5.1 mix. So not only do you have a more dynamic, less compressed mix, but you also have Wilson experimenting and doing something that isn't exactly the same as the old mix. So it is a fresh take. I also think that the new mix is audiophile quality. And it's the best that the album has sounded to date. And again, it wasn't a bad album to start with. So I guess the answer to that question is, if you have Dolby Atmos, if you love this album, yes, I think it's worth the upgrade, even if you have the 2012. if you have the 2012 and you're happy with it and you don't have Dolby Atmos, I can't really recommend it because there's not a whole lot that's new here for you. Maybe you might want the Royal Albert Hall performance, but for me, that doesn't justify the paying the full price for it just for one track. So I conditionally recommend it if, especially if you never had it before or you don't have it and if you love it. But if you love this album, if you have Dolby Atmos, it's worth getting. It's an upgrade. And again, it's an audiophile quality version of this record. So I think if it's something that you really love, you're going to want to pick it up. But if not, if it's an album that you just like, and 5.1 is fine with you, you're not looking to upgrade, keep your old disc. I don't think it's worth necessarily upgrading. I love this album. I'm a big fan of both of these gentlemen separately. Together, I feel like they play to each other's strengths. And I think, again, this is one of the best things in either of their catalogs. So it gets a recommendation for me. Don't forget to comment your thoughts below. Don't forget also to like the video. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the new Opeth album, The Last Will and Testament, when it comes out late November, please do subscribe to the channel because I am sure to cover that upon release. Once again, my name's Ian B. About, and you'll hear from me real soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching.